Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome listeners to Big Little Small Talk. You're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan. And today I've got someone with me who would not be a stranger to many of you, although he's dropped off the radar a little bit lately. But he's someone that has been the face of Lifeline Darling Downs here in Toowoomba for many years, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But thank you for being my guest, Derek Tuffield.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks for having us.
I should say Derek Tuffield OAM, actually, is how you're introduced these days.
Yes.
Now, Derek, normally I start at the beginning, and it's not your end. It's definitely not the end. But I want to talk about what you're doing most recently, and that is that you're the independent chair of Southern Queensland Rural Health Advisory Board.
Yes, mate.
So tell me about health in rural and remote and regional country areas.
Look, it's facing a number of challenges at the moment. Getting sufficient qualified practitioners, whether that's in the allied health area or in the GP area, remains a constant challenge for them. The hospital system out there it's going well, but it's also under a lot of pressure as staff come in, migrate away from the areas, and then trying to backfill those particular positions is certainly a constant challenge. And Southern Queensland Rural Health's major role is to assist with new students that are coming through that have selected the health area to get their employment and support, and to particularly with allied health services, again, nurses and OTs and physios. It's an area that we give them rural experience, what it's like to, say, live and operate in Charleville, Roma, St George, Gundawindi, Chinchilla, and here in Toowoomba as well, obviously because we're classified as rural. And then basically we also supply the accommodation for them, because that was one of the big challenges, and that's enabling us to have extensions in time with training with our students as well. So they come predominantly from University of Queensland and predominantly from Uni SQ now, but we do take from other areas when the vacancies are there.
So that organisation is facilitating health professionals to go into the country. Is that what
That's
it
right.
does?
To have
encourage
that,
them?
Yeah, to have that rural experience. Some come from rural areas. Some have been born in Charleville, may have gone to Brisbane to do the university studies, and then obviously coming back again. They're ideal candidates to hold them for longer periods of time. But it's about also giving people experience to say, these are the benefits of living and operating in a rural community, 5 minutes to home, close-knit, fresh air, a strong sense of community involvement, and also helping to meet an ongoing need, because a lot of the communities did grow during COVID because we had the transfer of populations across the border into those areas. So other challenges there, housing at the moment, sufficient housing going forward, where if you went back, say, 5 or 7 years, there was plenty of accommodation available.
What are the particular challenges for people's health when they live remotely and regionally? Is it mental health? Is it...
I think mental health is a common theme at the moment, but it can also be basically just having the right type of services, whether that be dental services as well in those areas, and also accessibility to GPs. They're under such demand at the moment, so that's an ongoing issue. So I think, I always remember when I was at Lifeline, it's slightly different. It's an interesting analogy in one way, where one of my staff was sent to Charleville office to do some work, and when he came back he said, there's no KFC there. So they're not always the services that in rural areas for people living there, and that's why I guess you've got flying doctors and Angel Flight and those that can help get them to main hospitals here, Toowoomba, Brisbane and so on.
Well, I would imagine that no KFC in Charleville is a first world problem. a very first world problem.
Look, it was good for the staff member at the time, but as a reminder that, rural communities don't always have the frontline services that we have in major cities like Brisbane, Toowoomba and so on. But there's also wish for equity to have more services there. So getting that balance right remains a constant challenge.
We've had another one of your staff from that organisation, Heidi Iser, as a guest on Big Little Small Talk.
Oh, okay.
And she is a model as well as a marketing person, and she was a wonderful interviewee. If you ever get a chance to talk with her and the work that she's doing in terms of size discrimination, and the things that she's doing is really groundbreaking. So hello Heidi, but we're here with Derek Tuffield, who is going to now talk to me about Lifeline, which was your most, I would imagine, substantive role in your working career, because you were there for over 30 years, 34 years, yeah. And I read somewhere where you said that when you first joined Lifeline in the Hodgson Street building, you didn't even have an enclosed toilet.
Correct.
Tell me about your career with Lifeline.
Oh yes, that brings back some memories. I joined Lifeline on the 17th of August 1987 and had just finished 17 years with the bank. I was with Westpac that merged in 82 and prior to that it was the Commercial Bank of Australia. Some people will remember CBA, some obviously won't, younger people. It was an interesting change. It was, I guess for me, the opportunity to be the business manager at that time. And I'd been telling people as a relieving bank manager how to run their business and doing it, I think, successfully, but it was fairly textbook. And this was an opportunity to put my money where my mouth was and say, okay, well, can you actually run a business? Can you make it successful? Can you actually grow the business and support the charity that's doing a piece of work that I had been admiring for some time? And so it was a direct approach, and at first I burst out laughing, but I gave it some serious consideration and, as I said, joined in 87. It was a 100-year-old transport shed. It was very dilapidated, and it was pretty hard conditions. 2 days into the job, I really stood there outside this makeshift office that was made out of 4 different bank petitions, Megan, and it was pouring down rain, and there was one light bulb, swinging in the breeze, and it's freezing cold. And I thought, what have I done? Maybe I should go back to the bank and plead insanity. But then there was that other part of me that said, you've made your bed, you need to dig in. And so I worked really hard to build the team, raise money. It was hard yards, but really gave me good insight into also what were the struggles that people coming into the shops were facing. And the toilet episode, I'm not sure you want to hear about that, but
no holes barred on this show, Derek. You can.
Well,
Be frank with me.
Well, the toilet was in the middle of the shop, and the shop was a clothing furniture shop. And so what happened? I'd gone to the toilet, and I could hear these people outside saying, "Oh, Doris, look at these shoes! $2 for these shoes." And I'm sitting, on the toilet, thinking, "Oh my heavens!" I can hear and then all of a sudden I could hear them go, and they went, "Oh, what's that terrible smell?" And of course it was me. And at that time, because the toilet had no lights in it, the light came through the roof, which was a piece of alcinite. A cloud came over. So then I'm sitting in absolute black hole of Calcutta in this toilet, not knowing where the door was, because it's only day 1 or 2 of me being at Lifeline. And these people complaining outside me not wanting to exit the toilet. It took me a lot of courage to get out of there. So the first thing, Meg, I had done and built at Lifeline was a set of toilets in the distribution centre. That's a true story. I did. So I had some people get a good laugh out of that.
That's an initiation by fire,
for
sure.
It was.
So Derek, you start with 15 staff. How many staff paid staff were on the payroll by the time you left?
Just over 300, about 301 or 2. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think when I took over in the year 2000, the staff numbers were about 100, I think, Meg. So in that following 20 years, I probably put on 200 staff. And some of that was due, obviously, to NDIS. We certainly got into the disability services part of it with Tranquility Care in 2017. But we're also expanding our rural services. So we had renovated the Charleville office. We had put services into Cunnamulla. We basically had services in Dalby, Warwick, Stanthorpe, and St George, of course. We had a number of services there. So shop at Tara, we'd had the shop at Tara's been there 30 years, which I'm really proud to say. And Sue Madden, who recently retired, had been a volunteer shop manager those 30 years, which is a fantastic result. So she was just awarded a life membership of Lifeline, and I thank the board for doing that for her.
Well, I'll take that up because I'm sure I've told you before that I am Megan O'Hara from Greenbar Tara. So that's right, you're looking surprised. Maybe I haven't told you that before.
Oh, well.
I hope to go back there on a golden carriage one day out to Tara with...
I got her phone number. I have you on it if you want to talk to her.
So, Derek, tell me how the model of Lifeline works. Did you have to think of new ways to raise revenue? Was that your job, or was that sort of somewhere higher up the chain in Lifeline? Or was it every man for himself in every district? Or
Look, I guess when we were back at 15 staff, you had a portion of the staff that were funded, particularly the counselling staff, that were funded by grants from state and federal funding. And then in the business division, it was all volunteer shop managers in those days. And then you had rag cutters and a truck driver and the business manager, and you had a bookkeeper. So the business division needed to be raising money to also pay electricity and rates and so on, but keep the staff employed. And I remember, Meg, it's a good question you've asked, because in my early days, and I'm getting my head around, after transition from a bank to Lifeline was fairly major, and all of a sudden you're dealing with the quality of clothing, and there's double A and A and B and C and D grade clothing, and recycling, and we had ABC television coming in and buying clothes from us for Dirtwater Dynasty productions, and so and then you're exporting, you're sending bales overseas of clothing. Anyway, I did this car park sale where we had 200 kilo bales of clothes, and people would come down on a Saturday. We sold for about 4 hours, $5 a bag. People would fill the bag up of clothes, and away they'll go. And one of my staff turned to me and said, "My job, Derek, depends upon your ability to raise income. And if you don't raise the money, I don't have a job, and then I don't feed my family." And that was probably really substantially when the penny dropped for me that, oh my God, there's more than just the business division counting on me to raise money, and I need to be smarter about how I do it. And so being a banker, I could read a balance sheet, and I saw that the balance sheet wasn't good, to be totally honest. It wasn't good at all. So I had a lot of things to turn around and then look at opening new shops, and that's where Wilsonton Shop became really important to me, because I went and saw Clive Berghofer and pleaded with him to allow me to have a shop there, and he said, you can have it for 3 months rent free, which was fantastic. And we set it up, and it fired straight away. It was a great shop. 8 years later, he still hadn't charged us any rent, and that was a very strong stabilising background, support financially for Lifeline, and I'll never forget that. Right.
So where did your region go from? It went out to the border, out at...
Yeah, well, on how it was done at Lifeline nationally was the old 075, 076 area codes. That's how they defined Lifeline region. So in the days of 076, which we were, that was like the Withcott was our eastern boundary, and then we went straight out as far west as you could go to the Northern Territory border. We went right out there as our coverage area. But as actual services, when I joined, we were only going about as far as Dalby at that point of time. But once we put on mobile counsellors like Ros Darracott, Ros started pushing further out and going to areas like Roma and St George and to Charleville. And so we started to increase services out that way.
And when you say services, Derek, are you talking about counselling primarily? Yeah. And this is psychologists, people coming in and having face-to-face conversations?
Psychologists, social workers, yeah. Predominantly social work first. We did have psychologists, and we still do, but social work seemed to be more the mobile counsellor that we were able to secure. And so they'd go out for a week at a time, and leave on a Sunday afternoon, come back on a Friday night, and do a loop. A lot of the counselling, Meg, was done in the parks, because We didn't have office accommodation. You needed somewhere where it was private. And also the other thing, all our vehicles, and a lot of people probably don't know this, but we don't brand our vehicles, or we didn't brand them because when you drove into a town, the Commodore would look like any other Commodore coming into town. It wasn't something, Lifeline's come to town with their counsellors, and that privacy for people was really, and still is really important. So we started that, and then we realised, I think St George was one of the first areas we identified, that there was this real demand there. So we ended up, we got a bequest from a gentleman here, Frederick's in town, and we bought a building there, which we've still got, and delivered services from there. And so we kind of grew it that way.
I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 102.7 FM, and you're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, on Big Little Small Talk, and we're talking to Derek Tuffield, who is enjoying his retirement and his cats, but more about that later. We're talking about his stellar career in Lifeline. Derek, why did you say that St George, you identified a particular need? What was happening in St George particularly?
St George is one of those areas, a rural area, big cotton area. A lot of backpackers use, so it can be transient that way. It was struggling, as Charleville was, with some of the floods in that period of time, which it still does, periodically, of course. But I guess our counsellor had reported that there was just this ever-increasing need, and counselling in a park, for one or two clients was all right, but when you had more coming through, that wasn't good. So the bequest also was specific about it needed to be applied against an asset, and so I think the bequest was 80,000, and then the purchase was 120. So we borrowed 40,000 from the bank and purchased the building for 120,000, and then we had to renovate it, of course, then and build the suitable offices inside. But we did that internally, and that's proved to be a great asset for St George. So that was about 1997, around that period of time. And we've got a number of staff operating out there now. Was
that the first time you had actually bought a premises?
Good question. Yep, it was. And not long after that, we bought this semi out at Charleville for 51,000. And opened our Charleville office. So we kind of went St George, Charleville in 97, and I think maybe before that, and we'd been renting offices in Dalby, and then we were able to purchase an office in Dalby. It was a deceased estate in 2004, and the staff still operate from there today.
When you said about St George, and it's not just unique to St George, I know it isn't, but it made me think of a story that the renowned Walkley winning, a journalist from ABC, Ali Bradfield, did about ice in country towns, and that's what I thought you were going to say to me. So tell me about how the things that you saw change in the services that you needed, or the things that your social workers and your psychologists were talking about, sort of from 97. What's evolved and changed?
So I guess I was a little bit further back so I guess the listeners understand we put the service in there. The ice issue started later than 97. I got this phone call from the then Mayor, Donna Stewart. And Donna, as you might remember, is still larger than life and was very parochial about her community. But there'd also been an ABC article about the football team in St George. Had put a line in the sand and had said, we're finding too many drugs being used, and if you're using drugs, you can't play football. It was one of the very first rugby league teams actually in Australia to put a line in the sand, I think. And so Donna came and approached me. Actually, I think she went to ABC first and said, Derek Tuffield's going to sort out the drug problem for me or help me with it, before she told me that she'd listed me in the article. But we did a program on ice out there, and we fundraised. We got some funding to do a good campaign about community awareness, because what was happening, people were leaving the needles in the gutters at St George at that stage. It wasn't in a good state, and Donna wanted it addressed. And so yes, the drug issue. What was also happening, and it's one of those things that people were travelling up. People who were making the drugs were travelling up from Brisbane, going to parts near St George at that stage, cooking them up on vacant blocks of land that no one could see, and then they'd do a drug run from St George back to Brisbane. And one of the dealers told me in some of the work we did that he'd made $30,000 on the trip from St George back to Brisbane. Now, he went to jail. The police did catch him, but he was kind enough at the time, because you've got to get your head around it. It's a very consuming atmosphere. So that was an eye-opener of what was happening. The other things, I guess, we saw, the 7-year drought, you might remember, that took a toll on farming and farming families. I remember the floods that we had there as well. And one of my families, my staff families, were being flooded at the time, and we had to evacuate them out of the house. And as they moved the electrical appliances to higher ground, I always remember one of our staff members' wife wanted to clean under where the fridge was, and husband said, "There's going to be 2 feet of floodwater through here. Don't worry about it. We'll fix it up later on." So then I guess domestic violence was another big issue that surfaced, in the level of community awareness, and it's still DV is still a major issue. And can I say too that it's with domestic violence, and predominantly it's male against female, but it's interesting that the national stats are that it's 23% female against male, and that's a stat that gets forgotten sometimes, not all the time. It's getting better, because I've certainly been on the receiving end of unhappy males who have been victims of domestic violence when they're not being recognised that that's happened with them. But DV, so Lifeline runs a major domestic violence program that covers St George, Cunnamulla, Roma and Charleville. So they've got a big program still running out there.
Tell me a little bit more about that program. So, if there's people listening and thinking, I'm particularly interested in the idea of coercive control at the moment, because I think even a lot of my friends who are women don't realise what coercive control is. It's someone putting Find My Phone on your phone, or ringing you all the time, or texting you all the time. And it's people say, well, I'm not subject to domestic violence, but it is a form of domestic violence. But tell me, what was the program? What's the programs that...
Well, it's still running. So the good part, so it's a Queensland government funded program. And I want to pay acknowledgement here to Rachel Patterson at Lifeline. Rachel came to me when we were putting the tender in to take on this piece of work, that we needed to be doing this differently, and we needed to make sure that we were upskilling constantly our staff as well as the environment changed, making sure that we had a number of First Nations staff on board to help with the training, and then their interaction with their families and individuals at the moment. We've actually, we've removed people from the southwest. We've moved people to Western Australia. We've moved people interstate to keep them safe.
So these are victims.
Yep.
So is the program, when you said the program, I was picturing you're working with the perpetrators. Is that correct?
Well, we mainly deal with the victim. With the perpetrators, in Toowoomba in particular, DVAC, Lifeline works closely with DVAC. And so DVAC does most of the perpetrator work. Years gone by, in previous funding, we did have a men's perpetrator program at Roma. It was incredibly challenging to almost lasso the men at that time to bring them in. Yeah.
Well, that was the question I was going to ask you. How do people get onto the program? Because I would imagine there's a fair bit of denial and shame and all of that associated for anyone to volunteer for a program like that. Or are they court ordered to do it?
Well, some are. Some are court ordered. One of the great programs that we've been able to secure funding from the Queensland Police through the Community Policing Board, in actual fact. Each year now, the Queensland Government gives the police for each of the districts $200,000 actually to fund programs to reduce domestic violence and crime in the area, particularly youth crime as well. And so there's a program called, for the listeners, called Caring Dads. So if they've got someone who, and I'm talking male perpetrators here, that are really struggling with their relationships with their loved one and families, if they ring Lifeline on 1300 991 443.
Can you say that number again
so
for me?
The number's 1300
Radio
991 443.
Good.
Monday to Friday during business hours. They can put their name down, and Lifeline normally takes anywhere between about 12 and 15 participants. It's a 16-week course, but we've seen some real benefits the police have. So the third course is about has been funded by, I'm pleased to say, by the Queensland QPS as well. So that's a great program that will help address those issues.
Wonderful, that's amazing. And I'll just remind the listeners again that they're on Big Little Small Talk, and we're talking to Derek Tuffield about his sensational work with Lifeline. Derek, I know that there's so many different prongs of Lifeline and dealing with refugees and dealing with the volunteers and the flood victims, drought, fire, all of that. You started to allude to a funny story before, and I thought you were going to tell this story. Tell me the story about when it was flooding in Toowoomba and you were in the store in Ruthven Street and your volunteers had to get up onto higher ground. What was that story?
So, that's the 2011 floods. So our Emporium store, the rain was coming down. I was actually, at that particular point of time, I was at the City Hall up in the Mayor's room, and we were having a local disaster management group meeting. We had about 26 agencies around the table trying to work out, how we're going to manage this, and the downpour was happening. Anyway, one of my staff rang the distribution centre and said, "Look, we've got water coming in the back door at the Emporium store in Ruthven Street," and of course with the rain, they got fobbed off initially and said, "Look, get a mop and just mop it up." And about 30 minutes later, they said, "We've got a foot of water coming through the shop at the moment." And they said, "What? A foot of water?" So ring the police. So they rang the police. The police said, "Where are you located?" They said, 302 Ruthven Street. They said, "There's a wall of water heading your way. Get your people, get to high ground." Now, luckily, that particular shop and the people who shop there has a mezzanine floor where we put the books. But back in 2011, we were still setting it up, basically. It had a lot of space. So anyway, the shop manager at the time's a lady called Deb Golding. She rounded up the customers, and there were customers still shopping in a foot of water.
They were after that $2 pair of shoes. I can smell a smell.
One lady was actually reading a book in one of the chairs, and there was a foot of water, your upper leg. And so we got it. Anyway, we got them up on my shop manager, wasn't me. I'm still up at the LDMG meeting. Got them up the stairs, and next minute this wall of water hit the back door. This is the door that faces eastward. Smashed the door, went through like a torrent, hit the clothes, knocked everything over, built pressure up on the western door, then blew it open, and sailed out into water running down Ruthven Street. And they're watching all this, and right at that point of time, this tropical men's shirt on a stand pops out, this male mannequin, and starts sailing out the front door down Ruthven Street. And Deb Golding turned to everyone there and said, "Isn't that typical of a male? First out the door when the pressure's on," which is a classical statement. But Deb,
I love that story. I remember you telling me that years ago, and I thought it was funny at the time, and it's still funny. She's quite the comedian now, Deb, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, she did a wonderful job for us, and then the Rotary boys and that came in after it all settled, and took us about 2 or 3 weeks to get it back operational again.
I can't imagine the trauma at that time. Lifeline must have been really the point of first call for lots of people.
Yeah, I had lots of people crying on the phone. People were ringing up my role was at that point of time was to help coordinate recovery also to Grantham, because Grantham had been hit so hard. So I was calling in all our support workers that we could get and mobilise them. You might remember too, Meg, that the range was closed then, where the range had been wiped out. So to get down the range, you had to have a police escort to get you down and get you up the range. So I had staff that were kind of trapped below the range and, of course, above the range. And so people were ringing saying, I need to be doing something. I need to be cleaning. I need to be helping. What can I do? So I was doing a bit of that allocation as well. But at the peak of it, in the weeks that followed, we used to meet at 17 Long Street. We had 16 different recovery teams going into the field at the peak of it to all, Millmerran. Warwick got hit first before Toowoomba got hit. Dalby, Chinchilla, and then you got Murphy's Creek got smashed. Grantham, Forest Hill got affected. And you might remember we got cut off too between Ipswich and that. So we were asked to pick up a lot more work in the Lockyer Valley. It was an intense time, really was. And for a lot of people, first time they went in the field face to face, particularly Queensland Health staff at the time, and they did a marvellous job.
Derek, are you someone who thrives on that drama or that that adrenaline? Do you think?
Do I thrive on it? I don't know. I think it's more that I'm more practical. It's you've got to be able to put your emotions to the side and deal with the reality. I've had truck drivers sitting there crying their eyes out when the donations were arriving, from all around Australia, and we can't take any more. We filled 5 warehouses full of donations that we managed.
That was clothing, mostly?
That's clothing and electrical appliances. People shipped it from WA. It was incredible. It took us 2 years to process it from memory. We had to hire at least 5 different storage sheds to put it in. There was just that was just one part. Apart from the human factor of people then coming in, particularly Murphy's Creek and the Grantham areas that were really heavily smashed at the time. But then I had people here in Toowoomba. People up around the Orderly Street, they got flooded as well. The water came down. A lot of people don't realise that. It went through their properties and they were flood affected, and then they couldn't go back to their properties. So I describe it, Meg, as having about 20 tennis balls up in the air, and you're juggling really quickly and you're trying to prioritise. And then we had to airlift people in as well because you couldn't get them in from the roads. You had to fly them in. I sent one fella out for one day and got him back 7 days later because we had more rain coming. I sent him to Tara. He still reminds me of that. But luckily, he had the Tara shop because we could fit him out with clothes and that. And the other thing, can I just share, when you're in disaster recovery mode, even though your area's been affected, one of the things I teach my staff and trainees in community recovery is don't forget that life still goes on. You may be smashed by floodwaters, but babies are born, people die. It doesn't stop. So I'd have staff in the field, and all of a sudden, the staff that had come up from Ipswich found out their house had just been wiped out by floodwaters. So then you got to get them out, get them back home again, and try and replace them. They're long hours. You're finishing work about midnight, and you're on lots of teleconferences, and you get 5 hours sleep if you're lucky, and then you're back into it again. And that's what it's like. It just is. Until you get some form of normality, which is what you're aiming for coming back in again.
So where times are relatively, and that's a pejorative term, I suppose, that we've come out of COVID. If you're someone out there now and you think, what is my best way that I can help Lifeline or services like Lifeline? What is it? Is it to donate money, donate time, donate goods?
Goods are always a great help for Lifeline because, there's a number of shops, and of course we've got shops out in the western areas as well, so people can actually get to purchase those items and support Lifeline that way. one of the things, I guess, in the last 20 years, a lot of male volunteers fell away from Lifeline. I think maybe from a lot of organisations. So getting male volunteers has been a challenge. Female volunteers, not so much. But when COVID hit, we lost, our volunteer numbers dropped from 300 to about 175. And then a number of those, a number of those volunteers said, oh, I've been doing this for a long period of time. I've enjoyed the break. I'm going to not come back. And that's fine. We thank them for what they did. So the numbers started to build back slowly, but you know, the men, not so much. When you can get a good male volunteer, they're gold, really, to hold on to.
What's your theory around that? Why aren't the men volunteering?
Well, sadly, we die before the women. You know, men, unfortunately, you know, we're not good at our own health, and so you have that type of issue. But look, no one's been able to fully qualify it. But I think basically in today's society, there's just so much you can be doing. You can be doing bowls. You can be doing on the internet, you know, you can do bus trips. There's a lot more that you can do with your time, and often, you know, what you would find with people who volunteered for Lifeline is that Lifeline had done something to help them at some time in their life when they were really struggling, and they wanted to give back, and so you would pick them up that way. But I can quote a stat for you. It's really interesting that back around 1990, a long-term volunteer in Australia was someone who had served 10 years in an organisation. By the year 2010, that was 2 years. So you can see in that 20-year time period, the way technology and everything had happened shifted the way people looked at doing volunteer work. Plus, I guess your demographics and, you know, the people born back in the 30s and 40s were taught, you know, you got to give back to the community, and people born in the 60s were more about challenging. We had Vietnam War, so you got different demographics coming through. But the ladies really enjoy the shop work, and that's not to say we don't. Lifeline doesn't have male volunteers. We do, but we don't have big numbers of them.
Well, before I go on to your retirement and what happens after all of that incredible career, tell me about the program that Lifeline does with the LGBTIQ.
Sure.
What's that about?
It's a program that the federal government, again, it comes back to domestic violence. So the program was designed about identifying that even in the LGBTI community, that domestic violence is an issue, and that there wasn't anywhere for people to actually go that they felt safe, that people understood what they were going through because of their sexual gender identity, and that there needed to be a safe area for them and people who worked with them who understood that. So we applied. I think we were the only organisation in Queensland actually that got the funding at the time, and so the program started, like, getting the right people ourselves was a real challenge. As an organisation, you know, was some people in our organisation at the time, you know, they were, should we be doing this? But the reality was, Meg, Lifeline back in 1997, we were working in the LGBTI community here with men's groups at that time, because there is a real need for it. And so that program, it's been assisting some incredible transitions of people where they've been struggling and living in, and a domestic violence program could be where a family has almost locked away a person because they've changed gender, and the families struggle to cope with it. So to help them to exit that environment and start a life outside of that. There's some of the issues that surfaced and were brought to us. And I need to say, not just from Toowoomba, this came in from all over the southwest. So it's a great program.
Very important.
And if people listening, again, it's at 1300 991443 if they want to do a referral or seek more information to that program.
To be available. Incredible work, and we haven't even talked about the work that you've done in the refugee space, but as per usual, I'm running out of time.
Okay. Sure.
Tell me about the 1971 Triumph 2000 project.
Oh, look, I've been a car buff for years. I've had a Ford Pilot, was one of my early cars I had. I restored many years ago with the help of Stapleton and Russell, a 1955 Rover 75. This car is a local car. It's a barn find. And it's been taking a back seat since I've retired because I guess of other challenges and family commitments. But I was out there before you came in this morning. So Rosemary said to me, my wife, it's time to do something with the Triumph. So it's a beautiful car, and the fact that it's a 4-speed manual, it's 6-cylinder, 1971, and they're lovely to ride in. They're just a really nice car, and hope to get it back on the road soon.
So when Rosemary says it's time to do something, it's either fix it or get rid of it.
Yeah,
a bit of that. It's not bring it into the lounge room and start working on it there, is it?
It's a code that you need to do something. And look, and I think that will happen now because it's been, retirement's been a busy time, a lot busier than I thought.
That's what they say. I don't know how I ever had time to work. Derek, I haven't even had a chance to talk about your childhood and where you grew up. I know you went to St Columba's in Albion, which I would have liked to have talked about, but there may be some of these questions might enlighten me about where you come from and the things that you've seen. If I can ask you, who's been the most influential person in your life and why?
Yeah, my dad. Sadly, Dad passed away in '96, but look, he was born in India. But from British parents, and had servants, and but went to boarding school at Mount Abu. He did senior in 1938 in Australia, which is almost unheard of back then. So a very intelligent man, very caring and loving man, and humble at the same time. It joined the RAAF, was an aircraft engineer, did 30 years with Ansett here. My poor dad would have rolled over in his grave when Ansett closed down. He loved aircraft generally, but he taught me about, I'm good with maths. He probably is responsible for teaching me some of the tricks about how to do that. About the importance of being a family man, and I didn't have much time with my dad. A lot of people, and it wasn't that he didn't want to have. He was a shift worker, being at Ansett. He worked, so when he was at work, I was asleep, and vice versa. But his accent was very mixed because of being born in India and that. But his calmness and composure, I think, helped me a lot.
Who else was in the Tuffield family besides Derek?
Well, I had Peter, my oldest brother. Then I'm second eldest, and then my sister Donna. She and I are what they call Irish twins. So I'm born in the January. She's born in the December of the same year. So I get great joy every December when she catches up to me. My brother Greg, Ian, and Jared, and sadly, 3 of them have passed away.
So that was a family of 6. Am I counting that?
6 children, 2 parents. Yep. Yeah, mum and dad. Yeah.
I could think I could do a whole show about your father growing up in India. That sounds like an incredible story. Yeah. Do you think your priorities have changed very much, Derek, as you've got older?
I think I've always known that when you're at Lifeline, when I was at Lifeline, one of my biggest challenges was making sure I didn't forget my family. It is quite easy sometimes to put your work before your family, and Dad always told me to put 100% into what I did. So I have 3 children. I've got Laura, who's 33. I've got Damien, 30, and Morgan, 27. and maintaining contact. Had lunch with my boys and Rosemary and I and their partners last Saturday. Unfortunately, my daughter couldn't join us, but so that family connection. And then I've got step grandchildren, so I've got a blended family, and I maintain relationships with them is really important. So no, I think that's probably my priorities are more focused that way.
Wonderful. But I suppose it sounds like your priorities haven't changed, because your priorities were family when you were younger and they're family now, I guess.
Yeah, look, at the time, it taught me, and again, for young dads listening, that those early years are just so critically important to be with your children and to spend time, and they grow up too quickly. You know, 1 minute they're 8, next minute they're 18, then they're 28. It just happens, and they say, it's. I always remember. So I'm driving a truck. It's a great story, and I'm driving down past Preston in this Ford Trader, and I'm going to do my first clothing sale for Lifeline. And there's a fellow called Alec Reithmuller, one of our board members at the time. Poor Alex passed away, and Lorraine Lovell was sitting next to me. And Alex, and my daughter's been born. Now, Laura's been born. And Alex turned to me and said, Derek, you can't turn back the years, And I said, Alex, she's just born. Like, come on, cut me some slack here, And then all of a sudden she's 33. And you think, yep, can't turn back the years.
Probably one of my favourite sayings, and I only heard it in the last few years, was, the days are long, but the years are short. And I remember those days. They were long. The one more cup of spilt milk, I thought I was going to go mad with the boredom of it. But then suddenly they're gone. Now, I'm definitely running out of time. Right. I'm going to scrap the list of questions and go straight to my second last one, which is, what's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor? Are you a dancing man, Derek?
Yeah, I am, actually.
I love a man who dances.
So it's Blondie, Call Me. So
song.
It's a great song. It's if that doesn't get you up on the dance floor, nothing will get you up on the dance floor and get you dancing. Yeah.
All right. Now, who is your favourite royal? Now, this person does not have to be living, and they don't have to be British.
Look, it is British. Look, I have Elizabeth I, in actual fact. I think being the first daughter of Henry VIII and the challenge that she had in her life. And also she took England through what's known as the golden years as well, and wars, and she was referred to as the Virgin Queen, of course, but she had a really tough time and in a male-dominated world. But she showed real leadership, and that's what we need in Australia, is good leadership. In any organisation, you've got to have good leadership. You've got to lead from the front. That's really important. So that, but also more modernly, I like Prince William. I think he'll make a great king when his time comes, and I just like the way that he gets about his business.
I like the way that you get about your business too, Derek Tuffield, and that's such a fitting answer, and that's why it's such a good question. You like those qualities of leadership and steadiness. Would be what I'm taking from what you've said there.
Thank you.
Derek, it's been a real pleasure to interview you today for Big Little Small Talk, and thank you for sharing your journey with your work and I'll look forward to hearing about that, seeing that triumph, zooming around the streets, all restored with you and Rosemary at the helm.
Yes, I look forward to it too. And look, thank you, Meg, and thanks for picking me to do this interview. I'm quite chuffed. Thank you.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.